They are tied to perceptions of danger, rarity, and reputation. These less tangible forces help explain why individuals knowingly enter a country their own governments tell them to avoid. And understanding those motivations is essential to making sense of Afghanistan's transformation into what some are now calling the most unlikely travel destination of the decade. That shift brings us to the next layer of the puzzle. What exactly drives people to gamble on traveling where almost nobody else will? The allure of the forbiddens. For many of the foreigners who choose Afghanistan, the pull lies in its aura as a forbidden space. Ordinary holidays to Barcelona, Bali, or Buenos Aires are easy to access and highly documented. Afghanistan stands apart as something off-limits, and that sense of prohibition adds rarity value. The fact that governments warn their citizens not to go turns the journey into a signal of boldness. For travelers chasing experiences outside the norm, Afghanistan becomes less a destination and more a psychological marker, a way of asserting that their travels carry risk and defiance. Modern travel culture amplifies this dynamic through visibility online. Social platforms reward novelty, pushing unusual content to larger audiences. Because of this, Afghanistan has become a backdrop that few others can replicate. A single clip of someone exploring Kabul's bazaars or standing at the cliffside niches where the Buddhas of Bamiyan once stood carries far more impact than yet another beach panorama. Reporting in international outlets has noted that influencer postings from the country are one of the main forces feeding demand. Travelers arriving with cameras are not simply there to see, they are also producing a digital performance that reaches millions. The phenomenon has bred what might be called risk-driven influencers. These individuals build their reputations by narrating every stage of their trips, checkpoints, guesthouses, meals, and landscapes. Their audiences follow along precisely because each scene feels unpredictable and unpolished. A short video of a drive on the highway to Jalalabad can accumulate views not for the scenery, but because of the unspoken question of whether a sudden problem might erupt. Viewers latch onto that tension, and the creator benefits from audience growth, sponsorships, and recognition. Many openly state that posting clips from such journeys is central to expanding their followings, blending travel into career strategy. That external attention is matched by internal motivation. For visitors, returning home with memories of Afghanistan delivers storytelling leverage. At a dinner party, someone describing Rome or Bangkok might be met with polite acknowledgement. A traveler who casually mentions spending weeks under Taliban authority will spark questions. Details about how they managed security checks, how locals responded, or how restrictions shaped their routine all become compelling conversation. In this way, the trip serves as social currency. It grants status within one's circles by associating the traveler with bravery, resourcefulness, or nonconformity. Adrenaline also plays a defining role. Many describe a sharpened awareness when moving through Afghan streets, watching surroundings more carefully, mapping escape routes mentally, and reacting to unexpected obstacles. That charged environment, uncomfortable for some, is the appeal for others. Eating a meal in a crowded bazaar feels more vivid when one knows the situation could shift abruptly. Hiking cliffs carries more weight when uncertainty hovers in the background. In these accounts, risk is not an unfortunate side effect. It is the heart of the attraction, the element that transforms standard travel into an experience marked by intensity. The dangers involved are impossible to ignore. Travel advisories highlight threats ranging from surveillance to kidnapping. Incidents of detentions and harassment surface regularly through embassy bulletins. Tourists often know these risks before departing, and the warnings become part of their preparations. They carry the understanding that the thrill they seek cannot be separated from potential harm. This is why so many describe their journeys afterward not as restful but as demanding, even exhausting. They measure the trip not by comfort, but by how they confronted uncertainty. Decisions to accept such stakes vary. Some content creators calculate that even a single trip might yield months of high-performing posts. Others, including former soldiers who served during earlier conflicts, explain it as a way to find closure, facing landscapes tied to their past. Among both types, justifications usually revolve around probability. If multiple travelers produce vlogs showing uneventful yet colorful journeys, then perhaps the danger is overstated. Each new set of uploads normalizes the idea that risk is manageable, encouraging the next wave of visitors. Even so, stories from travelers reveal how fragile that calculation remains. Crossing checkpoints often brings minutes of tense silence while documents are reviewed. Photography restrictions sometimes trigger sudden orders or confrontations. Visitors describe being trailed by armed personnel or watched with suspicion during routine movements. Every ordinary encounter carries the possibility of escalation. Many say this instability is exactly what brands the trip as different. Routine activities are performed against a backdrop of power exercised by unpredictable authorities. Rather than discouraging some travelers, that atmosphere frames Afghanistan as the ultimate testing ground. Unique geography and unfamiliar traditions combine with the persistent awareness of control. Visitors know they cannot simply melt into the background as they might elsewhere. They interpret this as proof of authenticity, a lived experience distinct from any curated holiday package. Among communities of travelers who prize endurance, Afghanistan symbolizes a proving ground. Online forums circulate itineraries and guides not in the tone of caution, but as mentorship. The act of going itself confers a kind of rank within these circles. The contrast with daily life intensifies this appeal. For many coming from orderly environments in Europe or North America, where regulations dictate even small details, Afghanistan's volatility is transformative. The lack of predictable structures shocks routine into disarray. This rupture allows travelers to return home with stories framed not as leisure but as personal transformation. The place functions as a canvas onto which they project narratives of resilience and adaptation. However, the very element that excites some travelers is what unsettles critics. Academics studying this trend, as well as many Afghan voices, raise ethical concerns. They argue that foreign visits risk turning a deeply repressive context into spectacle, especially when tourists highlight adventure while overlooking the fact that Afghan women are excluded from large areas of public life. To them, vlogs and travelogues risk normalizing a regime that systematically restricts half its people. This tension, in which guests enjoy access denied to locals, is a central paradox that shadows any assessment of this tourism surge. Despite these concerns, the symbolic pull of prohibition continues to function almost like reverse marketing. Official restrictions, meant to deter signal value for those who interpret forbiddenness as proof of authenticity. For them, the ban itself becomes the invitation. Each delay at a checkpoint, each unexpected barrier, is recast into a story of resilience to share with global audiences back home. The attention economy amplifies those stories, binding fear and fascination into a single package that spreads further online. This dynamic explains much of the individual psychology behind recent arrivals. Yet travelers do not operate alone. Their presence is quietly facilitated by structures on the ground, regulations selectively loosened, guest houses operating openly, and transport links kept running despite advisories. These measures are not accidental. They reflect choices made by those who govern Afghanistan today, choices that suggest the surge in visitors is more than just a spontaneous trend. It raises the question of why a regime long known for its hostility to outsiders now invests energy into making space for them at all. The Taliban's hidden calculation. For years, the Taliban's public image was defined by rejection rather than reception. In the 1990s, foreigners were virtually barred from entering the country, and during the post-2001 conflict period, Afghanistan's connection to the outside world came primarily through reports of war. But starting in 2022, a noticeable shift occurred. Officials within the Taliban, particularly those working under the Ministry of Information and Culture and its Tourism Directorate, began speaking of tourism as something to be cultivated rather than suppressed. The motivation was straightforward. Decades of conflict had left the Afghan economy fractured, while sanctions and the end of large-scale foreign aid left the regime sanctioned and cash-starved. Unlike trade or investment, encouraging outsiders to visit required no international recognition. It produced immediate revenue in dollars and euros from tourists spending directly on the ground. The policy shift soon became visible in practical terms. The Taliban moved to reopen consular pathways for visas, with their offices in places like Dubai processing applications that allowed foreigners to enter legally. The message was clear. What had once been an inaccessible destination could now be reached through official channels. Around the same time, flight connections into Kabul grew more reliable. Airlines operating out of regional hubs such as Dubai and Istanbul offered scheduled services, creating functional routes for travelers from abroad. For the first time in years, Afghanistan was not just symbolically open but logistically reachable, with visas in hand and a plane ticket connecting adventurous visitors to Kabul's airport under Taliban supervision. Against this backdrop, the Taliban authorized local agencies to market guided tour. Groups of young entrepreneurs positioned themselves online with English-language websites promising structured itineraries through Kabul, Bamiyan, Herat, and Mazar-i-Sharif. With explicit approval from the Ministry of Information and Culture, these packages highlighted recognizable heritage sites: Herat's centuries-old Friday Mosque, the valleys where the Buddhas of Bamiyan once stood, and trekking routes across the Hindu Kush. Some agencies advertised Taliban-provided escorts at checkpoints, intended to ease foreign concerns over safety and to signal official endorsement. What might appear at first as grassroots tourism was, in reality, increasingly structured within Taliban oversight. Meanwhile, the movement's media arms began creating promotional materials styled to resemble tourism ads. Videos emerged with promises of Afghan warmth and hospitality, crafted in stark contrast to the militarized images that long dominated portrayals of the country. The effort coincided with a larger push to recast Afghanistan online, showing not just conflict but markets, mosques, and natural landscapes where foreign visitors could be seen smiling among locals. The symbolism mattered. For a group that once closed itself off from outsiders, this shift presented something like an institutional rebranding effort, designed both for economic value and political optics. What made the approach distinctive was its modesty. The Taliban did not attempt to build luxury hotels or vast resorts. Instead, they leaned on smaller, lower-cost measures. Guest houses were encouraged to host foreigners. Local businesses were given discreet clearance to operate tour under official oversight. A tourism training institute was even launched, though open only to men, to prepare staff for a sector the leadership now saw as strategically beneficial. These were incremental investments, but in a fragile economy, even minor improvements created the scaffolding for a niche industry. Economically, the calculus is transparent. Each visitor brings foreign currency into a system where international banking channels remain blocked. Cash transactions dominate Afghanistan in any case, but for the Taliban, tourist payments deliver revenue streams that are immediate, relatively untraceable, and insulated from sanctions. The very fact that money changes hands inside Afghanistan, rather than passing through foreign banks, makes it valuable. Even small groups of visitors spending on hotels, food, and transportation become important sources of hard currency in communities otherwise under severe financial strain. There is also a more subtle dimension. By tolerating the presence of visitors with cameras, the Taliban allow narratives to form that cannot be manufactured solely through official statements. A steady stream of travel content showing foreigners walking through Kabul, climbing in Bamiyan, or shopping in Herat functions as a counterweight to depictions of Afghanistan as closed or permanently violent. Though unscripted, these portrayals align with regime interests by injecting imagery of normalcy into international circulation. In many cases, the tourists themselves become informal ambassadors, posting from places long absent from mainstream tourism feeds. This is, however, a calculated risk. Not all visitors reinforce the message the Taliban wish to promote. Foreign travelers upload without censorship, which means restrictions, poverty, and repression can also appear in their footage. There have been documented cases where enthusiasm was curtailed abruptly by state action. A foreign tourist arrested in 2022 was held for nearly 2 years before release in 2024. In early 2025, a British couple in their 70s was detained in Kabul and released only after sustained diplomatic pressure. These examples highlight the conditional nature of Taliban hospitality. Access is granted, but it comes with an unspoken reminder. Visitors remain under constant scrutiny, and their freedom is never guaranteed. Despite these incidents, the broader campaign proceeds. Hotels are nudged towards standards that can accommodate international guests. Transport services have been promoted to connect sites of potential interest. Even internet infrastructure has been selectively supported to ensure travelers maintain connectivity, which ironically amplifies the very social media content that publicizes both the journeys and the Taliban's tolerance of them. These are not sweeping reforms, but rather fine-tuned adjustments targeted at particular needs. They reflect a regime operating with extremely limited resources but pursuing deliberate outcomes. The political return is as important as the monetary one. Analysts note that each foreign account of safe passage through the country creates a small contradiction to the narrative of unrelenting repression. A YouTube video of a traveler sipping tea in a Kabul cafe or an Instagram post from Bandi Amir Lake spreads further than any ministry announcement. The Taliban have understood this dynamic. They do not have to speak as loudly when the content of outsiders circulates organically. What is presented as private storytelling becomes, from the perspective of the regime, a low-cost package of soft power. The tourist is the messenger, but the state is the silent beneficiary. This measured opening illustrates the Taliban's pragmatic streak. Tourism is not embraced because of ideological change, but because it provides rare channels of survival. Sanctions, limited trade, and frozen reserves leave few viable alternatives. Visitors with hard currency constitute one of the only ways to generate revenue independent of global recognition. At the same time, each visitor represents a potential instrument for shaping perception abroad. In strategic terms, that combination, finance plus narrative management, explains why officials have permitted and even promoted opportunities for foreigners to enter. Still, the gains come with heavy uncertainty. For every clip of breathtaking scenery, there remains the chance that a traveler will highlight gender restrictions, poverty, or arbitrary detentions. A growth industry cannot be stabilized if every visitor risks exposing contradictions between the regime's rules and its curated image. The Taliban are gambling that the benefits outweigh the damage, but the margin is thin. The entire strategy relies on foreigners continuing to come despite risks that remain visible and unresolved. What emerges then is a carefully managed opening with narrow boundaries. The Taliban invite tourists, but on their terms. Access is structured, surveillance is constant, and disappointment is a possibility at any moment. Yet the trend continues, producing both revenue and visibility for a government that otherwise struggles to maintain connections to the world. This calculation tells us much about the Taliban's priorities, but it leaves open another pressing question. If tours are indeed happening under these conditions, then who exactly are the people making the choice to go? Tourist profiles: who is really going? Those who enter Afghanistan today as tourists are not drawn from the broad spectrum of casual holidaymakers. Instead, the majority belong to a few distinct groups, and their reasons for visiting are tied more to identity and intent than to beaches or relaxation. Official figures from the Taliban's National Statistics and Information Authority, NSIA, confirm that the flow is heavily male. One release covering a 3-month period in 2024 noted about 141 women among almost 2,900 foreign entrants, underscoring how small the female share remains. Within this overwhelmingly male majority, 4 principal visitor types stand out: adventure backpackers, online content creators, ex-service personnel, and geopolitical thrill seekers. Each approaches Afghanistan differently, but all share a willingness to navigate costs, restrictions, and risks that deter mainstream travelers. Adventure backpackers form the first and most visible category. These are individuals who already move at the edge of structured tourism, often traveling for months through the Middle East and Central Asia with light gear and improvised plans. When their routes bring them close to Afghanistan, some see entry as the ultimate challenge. They usually rely on local guest houses and transport arranged informally rather than formal hotel networks. The appeal comes not from comfort, but from being able to say they crossed Taliban checkpoints or explored city bazaars few outsiders see. Because rural travel can be more unpredictable, many of these backpackers pool funds to hire local armed drivers, sometimes paying several $100s a week. For them, the expense is part of proving resourcefulness. What emerges is less about sightseeing and more about endurance, adaptability, and bragging rights earned by surviving routes few attempt. The second group treats Afghanistan as both destination and workplace. Digital creators, YouTubers, Instagram vloggers, and TikTok documentarians enter largely to generate content that will stand out in crowded feeds. Clips of Kabul markets, the Bamiyan Valley, or mountain road trips provide striking visuals framed by tension. Their audiences reward them with attention, sponsorships, and growth precisely because of the risk implied. Content creators invest in appearances by calculating logistics carefully. Many contract trusted drivers equipped with weapons, paying between $500 and several $1,000s depending on the distance and security level required. The money is counted as part of their production cost, offset by the returns of online visibility. In doing so, they don't just record Afghanistan, they amplify its accessibility by normalizing journeys that followers might copy. Their videos often frame the country not as chaos, but as surprising discovery, reinforcing the idea that risk can be managed by the savvy rather than avoided outright. A smaller but notable portion of arrivals comes from ex-soldiers and veterans, largely from the United States, Britain, and Australia. For them, Afghanistan is not an abstract conflict zone but a place tied to personal service. Some return seeking closure or reconciliation, wanting to witness the country without weapons or combat gear, as civilians rather than occupiers. Others describe curiosity about areas they knew only through military deployments. Their previous exposure gives them confidence with local dynamics and reduces hesitation about security. They often engage local guides they might never have considered as soldiers, moving through sites once considered off-limits under patrol conditions. Numbers are smaller in this group, but their presence illustrates how Afghanistan has shifted in perception, from battle space to a kind of open-air archive revisited to find different meanings. Then there are those driven by what might be called geopolitical thrill. These individuals treat travel as a form of immersion in world affairs. Afghanistan stands on the same list that includes journeys to North Korea, parts of Syria, or Libya. Visitors pursue not comfort but the sense of proximity to contested terrain. For them, staging a photograph beside an abandoned Soviet tank or posting from the streets of Kabul carries significance among peers attuned to global conflict. They do not necessarily stay long or range far beyond visible sites, but their motive is distinct: to experience the atmosphere of a place where international politics remain raw. These visitors also tend to invest in security arrangements more consciously, sometimes arranging armored vehicles through agencies at costs in the thousands. The expenditure signals seriousness, adding to the aura of danger and prestige attached to such trips. Although women remain a minority among arrivals, their presence is striking. Foreign female tourists encounter fewer barriers than Afghan women, who face official bans from parks, gyms, and cultural venues. European or American women can enter spaces closed to locals, provided they respect dress codes and accept heightened attention. For the Taliban, permitting this dual standard demonstrates control. Outsiders are tolerated when closely managed, while for communities, it highlights inequality. Afghan women excluded from their own heritage sites may watch foreigners access them freely. Accounts from these visitors describe the contradiction directly: curiosity and hospitality on one hand, but palpable awareness of standing where local women cannot. All of these profiles reflect in daily interactions. Few outsiders blend easily into Afghan cities. Clothing, equipment, and cameras mark them instantly. Guides act as intermediaries, explaining rules and smoothing paperwork, while interpreters assist not only with culture but with ensuring creators can film without immediate interference. Transport follows routes adjusted for security, with armed escorts sometimes riding alongside visitors to rural valleys or monuments. At each level, money in dollars or euros changes hands directly. Car hires, guest houses, market stalls, and restaurants adapt to the niche, reshaping themselves around spending patterns of small but steady foreign groups. What results is not mass tourism, but a patchwork economy reliant on trickles of high-risk, high-paying clients. The narrowness of these domestic markets is important. Unlike stable destinations that diversify tourism across families, retirees, and package travelers, Afghanistan depends almost entirely on a few archetypes. Remove any of them if influencers deem the country too risky, or if backpackers decide to bypass checkpoints, and whole parts of the sector could collapse overnight. A single kidnapping, detention, or hostile incident could redefine perceptions across entire communities of travelers. The stability of Afghanistan as a niche tourism hub is tied precariously to choices made by a relatively small group of risk-tolerant people. Yet even within this fragility, adaptation deepens. Drivers accustomed to aid convoys now shift to transporting tourists. Guesthouse owners tweak services toward visitors with cameras and dollar bills. English terms are learned to facilitate quick exchanges. In the mountains, homestays once priced for locals now shift rates to match what foreigners expect to pay. The very act of accommodating these outsiders reshapes practices, not because the flow is large, but because each individual represents significant financial weight. The imbalance of privilege is perhaps the starkest element in these interactions. A female tourist is welcomed into monuments forbidden to Afghan women. An ex-soldier recontextualizes a landscape once marked by violence while locals live under deepening controls. Digital creators take home earnings from video platforms while Afghan users confront censored internet access. Each group of travelers benefits from flexibilities denied to Afghans themselves. The Taliban tolerate this contrast not from openness but from calculation, weighing revenue and image management against ideological consistency. Visitors operate in a space of exception, enjoying permissions that are simultaneously unavailable to citizens. By early 2025, these archetypes, backpackers, digital creators, ex-service veterans, and thrill-seekers, have become consistent enough to constitute a pattern, not a passing phase. Their arrivals, though modest in total numbers, carry outsized significance for both foreign perception and local income. They highlight a peculiar economy that grows from danger, recognition, and performance rather than typical recreation. Whether it continues depends less on national planning than on the continued desire of these individuals to pursue distinction abroad. The practical outcome is clear. Afghanistan receives tourists not seeking comfort, but experiences unmatched elsewhere. And once inside, these travelers encounter more than just a backdrop of checkpoints and guest houses. Their journeys unfold across terrain that often stuns with natural beauty, yet is tightly bounded by rules and restrictions. What they find is a constant negotiation between what Afghanistan reveals and what it denies. On the ground, between beauty and rules,